Hi, everybody. Welcome to this wonderful Saturday morning program about bird watching with Jean Williams. My name is Mina Jane. I am one of the programming librarians at the Cary Library and really thrilled to be bringing this to you. I wanted to say a quick thank you to our foundation, which supports all of our adult programming. We're very lucky to have them, and all of your donations support the foundation, which supports the program. So thank you so much if you do support the foundation. Jean Williams is an avid bird watcher, has lived in Lexington for, what, 40 years, Jean?
More, but it's okay.
Okay. And she is also one of our reference librarians extraordinaire. So we're really thrilled that she's here to do this program, and I'm just going to hand it right over to her.
Thank you, Mina, and I'm so happy that so many of you have come back to see the second half of my show. It's my favorite topic to talk about birds, so I'm welcome to all of you to be here with me. Today I'm going to focus on the birds that migrate, the birds that live in Lexington for only part of the year, and then they move to another part of the globe for the other season. Generally, we're going to be talking about birds that fly down south in the wintertime, and they come back up to us for the summer, for the breeding season, where they find their mates and they make their nests and hatch the eggs and raise the young. But there also are a couple of species in our area that breed much further north in North America, up in the boreal forests near the Arctic Circle in Canada. And they come down to us, they come down south in the winter time. And so these are birds that we only see here in the winter. And then, of course, there are many species of birds. There are about 350 species of migratory birds in North America. And there are many species that just pass through Lexington on their way north in the spring and then south in the fall. And they don't spend more than a day or two in Lexington. And these are like mostly the warbler species. But I'm not going to talk about these birds today. There are millions and billions of these migrating birds passing through our area at least twice a year. But they're very hard to see. They travel mostly at night, high in the sky, and they fall down in the morning and land in the treetops. They mostly stay high in the treetops. They're feeding on the emerging caterpillars in the spring, and they are sometimes heard, but very seldom seen by those of us down on the earth, unless we happen to be bird watchers who are listening for them and watching them with binoculars. So I'm not going to talk about those migrating warblers. That would make a fascinating program, but that'll have to be for another time. There's a lot of new science around migration, about bird migration, that's very interesting. Answering all these questions. We're trying to answer the questions about why birds migrate, where they migrate, how do they navigate, what are the risks of migration. And the bird scientists have been coming up with a lot of technology that's been very helpful with the miniaturization of things like little transponders, things that can be actually attached to birds to follow them in migration. And also the discovery that migrating birds could be seen on weather radar. It sort of has changed the whole ballgame. And migration is just a really fascinating topic. So I'm going to share my screen now, and we'll get going with this to show you some of the birds that migrate in our area.
Jean, don't forget to turn your video off.
Oh yeah, okay, whoops. I wonder if it's too late. I think I'm too late with that.
I'll do it.
Okay, good, thank you. Okay, so. Okay, now before I start, because I'm a librarian, I want to mention a book. This is a new book that just came out last year, written by Ken Kaufman, who is a great birder and a writer of field guides, and he's a wonderful writer. It's called A Season on the Wind, Inside the World of Spring Migration, and he talks a lot about all these questions about birds and how they migrate. And it's a wonderful book. It's fascinating and fun to read. So this book is owned by Cary Library. So that's my recommendation. Now, my first bird is one that you probably have seen around town. It's the Baltimore Oriole. It's about 8 inches long, or maybe 9 inches long. It's not named after the city. It's named because of the color of the male bird. The orange and black is on the crest of George Calvert, who was Lord Baltimore, who had the charter for the colony of Maryland in the colonial period, and the colors are still on the flag of Maryland. This bird migrates into our area from Central America and northern South America, usually arriving in May, early May, and it leaves pretty early in August. It's mainly an insectivorous bird, but it does eat berries and other fruit, but mostly it's eating caterpillars and spiders. It will come to a suet feeder if you happen to feed birds suet. And it makes this bag-like nest. It just made to fit the body of the bird, and then the little babies that will hatch inside it. It's a very protective kind of nest. It puts it way out on the edge of a twig, out on the edge of a tree, for protection from larger birds, mainly like crows and blue jays that might rob the nest. The oriole has a very clear tone of voice. The song differs every year. Every time I hear one, it's a little bit different, but that tone of voice is always the same. And once you get to recognize, it's hard to describe, but once you get to recognize that tone of voice, you will hear the orioles calling to each other. As you can see, the female is kind of a drab version of the male, which is typical of a lot of birds. So another, let's see, what am I doing here? Okay. The next bird is the rose-breasted grosbeak. This is slightly smaller than the oriole. It's about 8 inches long. Again, you can see that the male and female are very different. The male is this bold black and white coloring with a bright red streak on the chest. The female has a white eye line and another white line under its cheek here, which makes it look like it has a little mask on. It's very striking, once you take a good look at this bird. As you can see, they have gross beaks. They have their big finch beaks. They can crack open sunflower seeds, which they like very easily. Now, this is a bird that also migrates from coastal South America and from Central America. It comes here in May when things are just getting going. And it also leaves fairly early. Mid-August is usually the last time we see these birds. Their diet is about half insects and half seeds and fruit. Their song is very robin-like, but a little more melodic, a little more complicated than a robin song. Some people say that a grosbeak sounds like a robin that's been to singing lessons. So here is a woodpecker. This is a much larger woodpecker than the smaller ones that we saw that live here all winter. This bird is about 12.5 inches long. It's the northern flicker, and if you see this bird in your yard, you'll usually see it on the ground. It'll be walking around in the short grass and sticking its beak into the ground, probing for insects. What it's mainly looking for are ant colonies that will have eggs, which is one of its favorite foods. But it will also pull up worms and beetles and anything else that it finds down there. These birds in the wintertime live in southern coastal United States. They come up here in late March. They don't have to travel very far, so they get here pretty early. And sometimes early April, you will start to see them. And they will leave in late September or early October. Again, they don't have to travel too far, so they'll stick around for a while. And since they're looking for insects in the ground, they don't really care if it gets a little bit cold and the insects have stopped flying in the air. So, this kind of flicker is called a yellow shafted flicker. There is another color morph of this flicker called the red shafted flicker. It's the same species, but instead of having these predominant yellow shafts on its wings that are visible when it flies, it has red shafts on the wings and on the tail feathers. You can tell a male and a female flicker apart because the male has, besides all this beautiful coloring, I think they're just one of the prettiest birds, the male has a black mustache here coming off of its beak. The female doesn't have that. She's just uniform brown. So the moment you see one, if you can see it closely enough, you'll be able to tell whether you've got a male or a female. Right now, there are young ones walking around, which look pretty much like the adults, but you can tell that they're a little bit smaller and they're kind of clueless. They're sort of walking around, don't really know what they're doing, and still kind of dependent on the parents to come and guide them and feed them. A great thing about flickers is that they are cavity nesters. They dig holes in dead trees to make nests, and they dig a lot of extra ones every year. So many other birds are dependent on the cavities that these birds excavate. If their numbers are declining, and if they decline much more, a lot of other birds will suffer the loss of these nesting sites. They make a sound, not really a song, but a sound, a call that sounds like their name. It sounds like wicka, 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 wicka. And that's the sound of the flicker. And another migrant bird is the gray catbird. These birds are quite common. Both sexes look alike. They're about 8.5 inches long, about the size of a robin. And they, a little bit further south from here, they live all year round on the coastal edges of the North American continent. They live all year round, all the way down to the Gulf Coast area. In the rest of the continent, though, they all migrate, and our birds migrate. We don't see them in the wintertime. They go down to the Yucatan and to Central America. This year, I saw the first catbird in my yard on May 17th. That's about normal for when they arrive. And then they will leave in late September or early October. Last year, September 22nd was the last day that I saw a catbird. They eat a lot of small fruit and berries, especially in the late summer and the early fall. They like the dogwood berries, blackberries, winter berries, little crab apples, blueberries. They're kind of a mimic bird. They can mimic other birds' songs. They have a very complicated song with lots of different parts to it. but they're called catbirds because of the way that their alarm call, which is I don't know if I'd call it an alarm call. It's more of an annoyance call. Like when they're annoyed, they'll make this noise, and it sounds a lot like a cat. It's sort of mewy, 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 that kind of noise. They are really totally gray, except for a dark stripe on the head, which is, sometimes you can't notice that. But they also have a rusty patch under the tail here, which is also kind of hard to notice unless you happen to see the bird from a certain angle. Otherwise, if you see a solidly gray bird, you can be pretty sure it's going to be a catbird. Now I'm going to talk about some little birds, tiny birds in our area. This one is one of my favorites. It's the house wren. If you remember last time, I talked about the Carolina wren, which is a migratory bird in our area. Excuse me, the Carolina wren is not a migratory bird. It tries to stay all winter, sometimes doesn't make it. But the house wren is a migratory bird, and it's very small. It's about 4 3/4 inches long. The sexes look both alike. If this picture were better, you would see its tail kind of sticking up. That's a typical look for this bird, that it has a perky little tail that sticks up. They're very small. They're much more often heard than seen because they're kind of secretive. I guess that's why they're called troglodytes. I'm not sure. They're a nationwide bird. They're called a house wren because they're willing to live very close to human habitation. They will build a nest in just about any cavity they can find. They will nest in birdhouses. So if you put out a birdhouse, as long as you can keep the English sparrows out of it, you might get a house wren nesting in it. I once saw a house wren's nest in a clothespin bag that had been left hanging on an outdoor porch for a whole summer without being moved. And when we looked inside, there was a house wren sitting on her nest inside the bag on top of the clothespins. Their diet is mainly insects, which is why they don't live here in the wintertime. They eat larvae, lots of little caterpillars, and lots of spiders. They're especially fond of spiders. They arrive here in early May. The first one I heard this year was on May 5th. And they leave in late September. They migrate from our area down to the southern states. And there are house wrens that live in Central America and South America, all over the continent, but they live there all year round. They're not the migrant ones. Our house wrens migrate just up from the southern states. They have a beautiful song, and if you're lucky enough to have a house wren nesting in your yard, you will be treated all summer long to the wonderful song of the male house wren singing. Male house wrens sing. They sing to attract the mates. They sing to inspire their mates to build nests and lay eggs, and they sing all through the nesting period to ward off strangers, and they also sometimes sing to give an all clear signal to the females. But they are just going all the time. House wrens have been recorded singing with their beaks full of worms. David Sibley, who wrote the Field Guide to Birds that a lot of us use, he wrote very exuberantly about the house wren song. He says, "It's extremely varied. The song is a rapid, rolling series of rattles and trills, culminating in a descending series of bubbling liquid trills." And he doesn't usually write that much about bird songs, but I guess he likes the house wren song just like I do. Here's another tiny little bird that migrates into our area. This is a chipping sparrow. It's one of the smallest sparrows. It's only 5.5 inches long. It's a tiny, delicate little bird. Both sexes look alike, and they both have this rust-colored cap. This is the sign of the chipping sparrow. And a clear gray breast, no stripes on the breast, just smooth gray. They eat seeds and insects, both. You often see them on the ground, picking up little seeds that you can't even see. They nest in the trees. They prefer conifer trees. One place that I have seen them nesting for years is in the big white pines behind Hayden swimming pool in Lexington. Those pine trees have been a home for chipping sparrows for many, many years, because every year I hear them and see them around in that area. They migrate down to Mexico and Central America in the wintertime, and they come back here in mid-April, and they leave in September or October. But once in a while, a chipping sparrow will overwinter, especially in southern Massachusetts. Sometimes they will stay with us all year, especially if it's an open winter and there's not much snow. They make a sort of mechanical noise. I wouldn't call it a song. It's more of a call. It's just a monotone, mechanical, trilling sort of sound. If we have time, I'll play some songs after this. And here is our very tiniest bird, which is one of the incredible migrators of the bird world. It's the ruby-throated hummingbird. Now, there are lots of kinds of hummingbirds in the west of the United States and in the Southwest especially. In the east, we have only this one kind of bird, and this bird is only found in the eastern part of the United States. And it's one of these tiny little birds that can hover in flight. And unless you have a lot of flowers in your garden that appeal to hummingbirds, or you have a hummingbird feeder, you might not ever have seen one of these birds, but they are everywhere. Sometimes if you're out working in your garden, you might hear the buzzing noise of a hummingbird flying past your ear. But they move very quickly, and it's very hard to see them unless they land on something and settle down, within your sight. They feed primarily on nectar from flowers, but they also will eat tiny little insects. And like most birds, they feed insects to their babies, so they need a lot of tiny little insects as well. The hummingbird migrates up from Central America in early May. Usually I see them at my feeder around the first week of May. And they leave by mid-September. They need to be gone. When the flowers are gone, they are done and they will leave. The amazing thing about their migration is that they will fly down to the southern states, and they do this in several days. They'll stop and eat on the way. And when they get down to the Gulf of Mexico, though, the ones that are coming through Florida, they go straight across the Gulf of Mexico in one night, and they fly nearly 1,000 miles just in one night. So it's quite amazing. They will sometimes just sort of fall in exhaustion on the other shore, but many of them make it, and then they come back the next year. They will eat at a hummingbird feeder, at a sugar water feeder, and we can talk about those later. But they're very feisty birds. They don't like to share the feeder with any other. They will chase away another hummingbird if it comes to the feeder at the same time. The females are dominating in this relationship, and females will establish their territory. And once they have mated with the male, they will chase him away. They build the nests, they feed the young, they do everything on their own. Now this bird is a bird that I don't think you will ever see in your yard, but you might see it above your yard. You probably will. It's the chimney swift, and it's a very strange bird. Small. It's only about 5 inches long. The wingspan is actually longer than the body length of this bird. They're in the family of birds called the Apodidae, which means without feet. But they actually do have feet, but you never see the feet. They are aerial birds. They live most of their life in the sky, flying. They can't perch. They can't land on tree branches or perch on a roof. What they do is they're either flying and eating, or they have crawled into a chimney or a hollow tree. Originally, they nested in hollow trees, roosted inside large hollow trees. But since there are so few of those around, and there are a lot of man-made chimneys, they have adapted the use of the man-made structure of the chimney. Unfortunately, though, we are kind of losing chimneys as well as losing hollow trees, and it has had an impact on the chimney swift. In some places, people are building artificial chimneys to accommodate these birds, because so many people now either don't have chimneys at all because they have side venting furnaces, or they block off the tops of their chimneys with chimney caps or grates or something to keep animals out. But unfortunately, it also keeps out the chimney swift, which could use the chimney in the summertime when it's not being used. But they are utterly amazing birds. I find them fascinating. They fly with very rapid wing beats. They're very acrobatic. People call them a cigar with wings. Did I say that before? That's what they look like. They eat insects that are caught on the wing, flying insects, beetles, bugs, caddisflies, mayflies, crane flies, flying ants, bees, gnats, just about anything that goes high in the sky. Not mosquitoes, though. Mosquitoes, unfortunately, are low-flying insects that don't get much above the second floor level of your house. So mosquitoes are not a big part of the chimney swift's diet. These birds normally you will see them in small groups, family groups of 3 or 4 that are roosting together and flying together and hunting together. But later in the summer, after the babies are hatched and fledged, and they will join in with other groups of chimney swifts. If they can find a place where they can all roost together, they will amass in large numbers. And some places in the country, you can see them in their thousands, flying together and then all going down into the same chimney at night to roost. I have never seen that many in Lexington, but in 2012, I recorded that we had a flock of 25 to 30 of them in late August and very early September that would fly around every evening around my house. I live in the center of Lexington. And it's just hypnotic and wonderful to sit out in the evening and watch them flying. They make chittering noises, and sometimes very loud. Sometimes you'll hear this chittering, high chittering noise. And you'll wonder where that bird is. If you look straight up into the sky, you may be able to see them. Early in the spring, they fly very high. I think this is it's more when they're not feeding, but socializing and doing their mating rituals and things. They will fly up very, very high. they typically cruise around 60 to 100 feet, but they can go up to 500 feet high. And they're catching insects that are swarming, insects that are rising into the sky. And the insects typically will rise in the early evening, and that's when the chimney swifts are most active. And what the parent chimney swifts do is they fly around for a couple of hours, essentially with their mouths open. They have a big, thick neck here, and they can open their beak very wide, and they collect thousands of insects in their mouths. And they don't stop to feed the babies until they're full up. And then they bring this whole bolus of insects back to the nest and give those to the babies. So one place to watch for chimney swifts, if you don't see them around your house, is in Lexington Center. If you get into one of the big parking lots, like the municipal parking lot or the parking lot behind the library, where you can get a good view of the whole sky, then you're likely to see chimney swifts zooming around. But by late August, early September, they'll be gone. And we won't see them again until mid-May, when the insects start to fly again.
Jean?
Yes?
We have a question from Susan.
Yes.
Do you
Yes.
recommend continuing to fill bird feeders all year? I usually take mine down in late April, but others seem to feed all year.
Well, yeah, I was planning to talk about bird feeders later, but what I would say is the bird feeding that you're doing, you have to realize that you're feeding the birds for yourself, not for the birds. You're feeding the birds so that they'll come to your yard so you can see them. They don't need to have your food. It's not what they're, in the summertime especially, it's not what they're feeding to their babies, you know, and you will see a drop off in use of your feeders by all the types of birds in the summertime. Except you will attract a lot of grackles and a lot of sparrows and English sparrows and birds that you might not want to have at your feeder. But you don't need to keep feeding if you want to see the birds. I like to see the birds because they bring the babies into the yard, and it's sometimes fun to see the young birds. But I realize that I don't have to do that. It's not actually, you don't even have to feed birds in the wintertime either, but you know, it's something, it doesn't hurt to feed them, except that of course you're attracting a lot of undesirable things too. But I'll talk a little more about bird feeding later. These are now 3 blackbirds that are in our area that you're likely to see, especially if you live near a wetland. You will see the red-winged blackbird. It's one of the most abundant birds in North America, mainly because it's abundant in the central part of the country, in the farm states. It lives in marshy areas. This one's perching on an old cattail seed pod. Its habitat is the wetlands and brushy areas. The male is somewhat larger than the female, and as you can see, the male is solid black. The female is mottled, brownish color. The male is very noisy. He has these bright red shoulder patches, and he shows them a lot in the spring, especially. These birds are among the most polygamous of all birds. The male establishes a territory, and he gathers a harem of females around him, and he tries to keep intruders away from his females. So he makes a lot of noise doing that. The females, meanwhile, are building the nests, and they build the nests in, they attach, weave grasses through the uprights of plants like cattails or reeds in the marshy areas, and they line the nest with mud and fine grass. And in the breeding season, they are eating mostly insects and feeding those to the babies, of course. In the non-breeding season, they eat a lot of seeds and farm waste, and this is why you, on farms, you will see them a lot, in thousands actually. We are just above the northernmost limit of their year-round habitation. Ours usually leave late in the fall and they return very early in the spring. They migrate just a short distance, a little bit further south where there isn't so much snow. We might even see one or two of these birds in late February or early March, but the bulk of them arrive in April and then they leave in November. This is the grackle I mentioned before. You might see a lot of these at your bird feeder if you're still feeding in the summertime. They are larger than the red-winged blackbirds. They're 12.5 inches long. It's one of our bigger blackbirds. The only bigger one, I guess, is the crow. These are often found in large flocks of mixed blackbirds in the fall and in the winter, and you'll see them congregating in trees sometimes. If they pick a tree near your house, you will definitely hear the grackles making a lot of noise. The male is a little bit larger than the female, but they pretty much look alike. They're black. The female is more dull. The male gets to be very shiny in the spring and iridescent, and the head can look very blue in certain light. It's very shiny. They have these prominent yellow eyes, which you notice. After the breeding season is over, they will join up in large flocks with blackbirds and cowbirds and starlings, and they'll roost at night together. And then they migrate. In late October, they'll go down short distances further south, and they'll arrive back again in late February or early March. They are, rather than being a bird of the marshes like the red-winged blackbird, they are birds of open woodland and fields, and they do very well around human habitation. So we've got plenty of grackles. They eat a lot out of your bird feeder, so you might not want to use a feeder that a big bird can get into easily because they'll eat you out of house and home. A brown-headed cowbird is the third kind of blackbird that I'm going to talk about. These are sort of smaller than the other kinds. They're only about 7.5 inches long. They were originally evolved to follow the migratory ungulates in North America. The buffalo, and before them, the other ungulates that lived here during the Pleistocene era. And the adaptation that they have made to their sort of migratory lifestyle is that they practice brood parasitism. Never mind. They will put their eggs into other birds' nests, and they let other birds hatch them and raise the chicks, and they move on. And this is an adaptation that works very well for them in this sort of migratory lifestyle where they're following the herds of buffalo and eating the insects and seeds that are kicked up by the feet of the animals. But now, because of the widespread settlement of the whole of the North American continent, these birds have spread out their territories, and they're now living much more in developed areas, and it has opened up to them many other birds to parasitize. So birds that they would never have encountered in their original evolutionary state. The female bird may lay as many as 40 eggs in a season, and of course all of them, each one in a different nest. And the cowbird baby is typically bigger than the host babies and will grab more food and make the parents work harder to feed it, but otherwise there often is not too much harm done. It's only a problem really in situations where you have a threatened or endangered species of bird that's being parasitized by cowbirds. In that case, ornithologists may try to remove the cowbird eggs from the host bird's nests and destroy them. One bird in our area, the catbird, is very aware of the difference between her egg and a cowbird egg. And if she finds a strange cowbird egg in her nest, she will destroy it or knock it out of the nest. And so the catbirds are very hard to parasitize. But I have seen cardinals feeding big cowbird chicks, and I think they parasitize titmice as well. So they are mostly ground foragers. They eat insects and seeds. So just about anything that a mother bird will offer was going to be okay with the cowbird baby. Now, the last two birds that I want to talk about today are the birds that come to us in the wintertime, and they don't breed here. The first one, they're both small birds and actually sparrow-like birds. This is the dark-eyed junco. It used to be called slate-colored junco, and it still is slate-colored, but we don't call it that anymore. It's called the dark-eyed junco now because some of them are not slate-colored. They come in winter with us. They arrive in October. Usually the males come first, and sometimes we never even see any females. The females end up migrating further south. And then in April they will leave, but they will come and they eat, they forage on the ground. They like to be on the ground mostly. They like to scratch in leaf litter underneath bushes if there's not too much snow. That's why it's nice to leave leaf litter under your shrubs for these birds to scratch around in. They usually don't eat at the feeder or come up to a feeder, but they will eat underneath it, and they'll eat the seeds that other birds knock down. They don't sing in the wintertime. They're very quiet little birds. They do sing in the north, though, when they get into their breeding ground. And I remember one time when I was on vacation in Maine, hearing this bird singing, and what is that bird? And it turns out it was a junco, and I was up in the junco's breeding territory, and so for the first time I was hearing them sing. They will often migrate in small flocks. They'll all arrive together, and then and sometimes they're mixed with white-throated sparrows. I'll show you next. And in fact, these two birds are so closely related that they can sometimes hybridize. I've never seen a hybrid, but I guess there are some. This is the white-throated sparrow. It's a little bit larger than a junco, but still pretty small. The males and females look both alike. You might be surprised to see one that doesn't look quite like this picture, though, because there are two different color morphs of this bird, and we see both of them in our area. It's kind of like squirrels, where there's a color morph of a black squirrel, and the normal squirrels are gray. Well, these birds come in two colors, the white striped and the tan striped, and the stripe refers to these white marks on the top of its head. In this bird, and in a lot of the sparrows that you'll see, the white is very bright white, but there is a tan striped variety that in which these stripes are tan colored, otherwise look pretty much the same. These birds generally breed further north, and sometimes way up north in the boreal forests. They winter in the southern territory, which is where we live. And some of the birds in Massachusetts will stay all year round and breed here, but I have never seen one in the summer here. in our yard, the whitethroats leave in late April or early May, when pretty much the same time that the juncos leave. And they return in early October. They also forage on the ground the way juncos do. They like to forage in brush piles, underneath brush piles. And this bird will begin to sing before it migrates north. So we get to hear its song in the spring. It's a very pretty little song. The mnemonic device that people use to remember it is the words, "Oh Sam, peepity, peepity, peepity," and it's sort of, "Oh Sam, peepity, peepity, peepity. Oh Sam, peepity, peepity, peepity." So if you hear that sound in the spring, you'll know that that's a white-throated sparrow who's getting ready to leave. Now, I would like to spend the rest of my time talking about ways to make your yard more attractive to birds. And I have 7 ideas, suggestions here. I want you to know, though, that some of my ideas about having a bird yard sort of conflict with the standard style of landscaping here in Lexington. So if you're interested in impressing your neighbors with how beautiful your yard is, you might not want to follow all of these suggestions. But my concern is mainly to use my yard to be a place where birds can live, not just eat, but also nest and breed and raise their baby birds. So my first suggestion has to do with bird feeding. Certainly if you want to bring birds into your yard, setting up bird feeders is one way to do it. They will come to eat. And if you put in a bird bath, like this one here, they will come to bathe too, especially in the summertime. They like to splash around in the water, get rid of the mites that are underneath their feathers. As you can see, this is my yard. This is a bird feeding area of my yard. It's really the only place where we have grass in the yard. And I have a variety of bird feeders here. This is a suet feeder. There's a little basket that holds suet blocks or raw suet, which actually right now I can't buy raw suet because there's no butchering going on in the stores because of the meat shortage. So if I'm going to feed suet at all, it has to be these commercial blocks of suet, which the birds go through very quickly. This is another suet feeder that hangs horizontally so that the birds have to come from underneath and hang on. And the idea is that it discourages the less acrobatic birds like grackles and blue jays. And it does work to a certain extent. The woodpeckers enjoy that, and the other birds don't like feeding that way, so they don't eat as much from there. And then I also feed sunflower seeds and thistle seeds. This is a thistle feeder to attract the little finches, the goldfinches, the house finches. And this is sunflowers. And this is what we call cheap seed, which is mostly those millet mixes of seeds that you can buy at the hardware store, and the grocery store. And they will attract house sparrows. So if you're plagued with house sparrows, don't use that kind of seed. Just use the more specialized varieties because it's very difficult to get rid of house sparrows once they've decided that they like your house. I also have a hummingbird feeder that I keep in a separate place. These birds, hummingbirds don't like to have other birds close to their feeder, so I advise keeping a hummingbird feeder pretty far away so that the other birds don't bother the hummingbirds. We group all these feeders together because it makes it possible to see the birds easily from the kitchen window. That's why they're all grouped together there. Now, this is a picture of a typical suburban house lot. This is not It's not in Lexington. It's somewhere else on the Atlantic seaboard, but it could be in Lexington. It's not a very bird-friendly yard. The reason is it has, first of all, way too much grass and not enough shrubbery. Birds need shrubbery. They need it for habitat. They need it for protection. They need it as a place to raise their babies, and they also need the food that comes with the shrubbery, the insects or the berries or mainly insects. This yard is dominated by two trees, which are both non-native trees. I can tell from this picture. These are Cary pears, or sometimes called Bradford pears. And there are a lot of these trees in Lexington. They're not native trees. And you say, well, what does that matter? You know, they're trees, they're green, they have branches. The reason why it matters is that native plants feed native insects. Trees that are not native will not be eaten by any insects because the insects that live here in North America, by and large, except for the invasive ones, the insects have evolved to live on certain plants. Most plant-eating insects are specialists, and they can only digest one or two particular plant combinations, chemical combinations in particular plants. I mean, a very famous example of this is the monarch butterfly. The butterfly can go to any flowers and drink the nectar, no problem. But when it goes to lay its eggs, it must lay its eggs on milkweed plants and on milkweed variety because its caterpillars can't digest any other kind of plant. So that's why if you have no milkweeds, you're not going to have any baby monarch butterflies larvae. So my second suggestion is minimize your lawn and plant more native shrubs. These are other parts of my yard here in these pictures, and as you can see, I have a lot of shrubs. And I have planted most of these that you see because when we moved here, the yard was covered with non-native shrubbery. It had a lot of forsythia, privet, Japanese barberry, multiflora rose. It was filled with invasive species, a lot of oriental bittersweet. And the trees here there were trees, the tree line was dominated by a lot of Norway maples. And we have spent a lot of years getting rid of all of those things and planting native shrubs. And dense shrubbery, I think, is the secret for bird life. And then, as I mentioned earlier, you might want to skip the bark mulch. I know bark mulch is really popular with everybody now, and it's what the landscapers like to use to keep down weeds. Weeds are really not a problem. I mean, weeds are another thing. Weeds are really native plants. So the leaves underneath your shrubs are what feed the birds in the wintertime and in the spring. They're filled with little arthropods, little insect eggs, and caterpillars that overwinter underneath in the leaf litter. This is leaf litter that's under an elderberry bush. This is leaf litter in another part of my yard. But I recommend if you need grass, of course, you have to rake the grass, but don't rake the leaves from under the bushes. You can even, if you do have to move leaves around, don't use a leaf blower because that kills the little insects that are overwintering in the leaf litter. Another suggestion is to build a brush pile. Brush piles are great habitats for birds and also other animals. Once had a turkey nesting under this brush pile. They provide bugs. The bugs are decomposing the woody material in the brush pile, and spiders and other insects abound in brush piles. The wrens love the brush piles. The white-throated sparrows and the juncos live in them in the wintertime. And they provide winter shelter for a lot of birds. This is a very large brush pile, I will admit. You might not have room for this much on your property, but this was a consolidation of a couple other brush piles, and they do decompose. I mean, eventually they'll settle down, and if you don't add any more, if I don't add any more to this brush pile, in 5 or 6 years it'll be much smaller than this. And then as regards trees, if you're able to plant trees on your property and you want to plant trees, plant native trees. Here's an example of an oak leaf. This is a typical oak leaf. It's got holes in it because insects are able to eat the leaves of this tree. Oak trees are the #1 choice in our area. They support more than 500 species of native insects, and they're very useful. The second most biologically useful tree in our area is the pin cherry or the choke cherry, which a lot of people consider to be weed trees, and they'll cut them down. But they are wonderful trees for birds. Not only do they provide support for more than 400 species of insects, but they also provide berries and things that birds eat in the fall. So native trees in general are what you should be aiming for. And if you have a dead tree on your property, try, if at all possible, to preserve this tree. Dead trees are getting to be very hard to find in this town. The tree people will want to cut them down because they want to be paid for cutting them down. If the tree is not endangering your house or your neighbor's house, try to see if you can leave it standing. For eventually it will fall, but as long as it's in a place where it isn't going to hurt you. Or you could have just the upper branches taken off and leave a trunk. This is a trunk of a dead elm tree that's on my property, and it's probably about 11 or 12 feet high. The branches have all long since fallen off, so just the trunk is standing, and you can see that birds are using it to make homes. One of the reasons why our chickadee population is declining so precipitously is that there just aren't enough dead trees around for the habitat for this bird. Plus, a chickadee requires 6,000 to 9,000 caterpillars to raise a hatch of babies. So it's really important that we have native trees that can provide those caterpillars for the chickadees. And all the other birds, of course, too. And if the trunk does have to come down, or if it falls down on its own, if you can possibly leave it there, you're creating all kinds of food possibilities for insects. You can see this tree trunk here is just rotting away. If you opened it up, you'd find it's full of carpenter ants with their babies, with their little larvae, and all kinds of bugs that are eating the rotten tree, and that's food for birds. This one I'm not going to say much about because I think it's pretty obvious. If you're trying to grow insects for the birds, you don't want to use herbicides or pesticides. Especially don't use neonicotinoid pesticides, which get absorbed into the body of the plant and make every cell of the plant toxic to insects. The pollen, even the pollen and the nectar in the flowers becomes toxic to insects, and naturally not good for birds either. Watch out for treated seeds and treated garden plants that you might buy. make sure that when you buy garden plants to put in your yard, that they are from a reliable nursery that's not using neonicotinoid pesticides. That family of pesticides have been completely banned in Europe, and I'm hoping that they will soon be banned in the United States, because they are definitely involved in the decline of insects, precipitous decline of insects in the developed world, and and that affects birds as well, of course. My philosophy is, if you need a pesticide to grow something, you should not be growing it. And then my final remark is about cats. I know that many people love cats. They're the most popular pets in America. But roaming cats kill 3.7 billion birds, at least, every year in the United States. They are the single greatest source of human-caused mortality for US birds and mammals. And that statement comes from the Smithsonian's Conservation Biology Institute that published a paper on cats in Nature in 2013. So enough said about cats. Hopefully, I have a feeling that people are starting to realize that cats need to be kept indoors, and maybe it's because the coyotes have been eating so many cats in our area. But I see fewer cats roaming around now than I used to see. So just remember this: native plants feed native insects feed the birds. And here's a picture of spice bush with a hole in it, and here's the spice bush caterpillar, spice bush butterfly's caterpillar. Here's the beautiful butterfly itself. And here's a beautiful bird, beetle called a locust borer, and it feeds on goldenrod. So if you grow goldenrod in your yard, you may see some of these beautiful beetles. So I want to mention two books before I end. This is a book called The Bird Garden by Stephen Kress, and you can get this at the library, and it's also available still in print for sale. It's a wonderful book on how to, which plants to choose, which birds like which plants. A very nice book, and it's divided in geographical areas, so there's a whole section for the Northeast, and it's very useful. This next book, Bringing Nature Home, is a Bible for people who are interested in birds and insects and native plants. It's written by Douglas Ptolemy, who's an entomologist at the University of Delaware. So he talks a lot about the Eastern situation and how to sustain wildlife using native plants. And then my final screen here are a couple more books about native plants, particularly, because this is something I know people often wonder, what's native, what isn't native, where can I get native plants? This is a great book, Donald Leopold. I refer to this book all the time, Native Plants of the Northeast. And again, it's specific to our area, so it's not going to tell you about plants that grow out in prairies. It's going to tell you about plants that you can grow in your yard. Also, the wildflowers of New England. If you're going to let some of your land go native, you're going to be looking at plants from a different point of view, and you're going to want to know what wild plants look like in our area. What's wild, what isn't, what's invasive. This is an excellent book with really good pictures and good descriptions of the plants. So it'll help you learn to identify plants. And then, of course, we have this wonderful resource nearby us. It's used to be called the New England Wildflower Society, and now it's called the Native Plant Trust. It's an organization that maintains the garden in the woods in Framingham. And their website, nativeplanttrust.org, is just a goldmine of information about native plants, about invasive plants, about how to get rid of invasive plants, and how to cultivate native plants. They also sell plants out in the garden of the woods. Right now you have to do it by appointment, but in normal times, it's a great place to go to buy native plants. There are other nurseries around. I don't want to name names of nurseries because I might miss some, but there are nurseries that specialize in native plants, and the Garden in the Woods place will help you find those. So that's the end of my PowerPoint. Do I have time, Mina, to play some bird noises, or is that?
Actually, we have a couple of questions, and it is a little bit
Okay.
past 11, so maybe we could go to the questions.
Okay, I'll go back to my, let's see. I guess I'll just go back to the beginning of this. Okay.
Okay, so Francis wanted to know, how can I tell the difference between bats and chimney swifts?
Well, let's see. Bats usually fly lower. They fly just, just above, just at the tree height, or maybe just above, and sometimes swoop down even lower than that. Bats fly at night when it's getting dark, and that's when chimney swifts are not flying. By the time it gets dark, chimney swifts will go back to their roosts. They don't hunt at night because they can't see. They have to be able to see the insects. Bats, of course, do the echolocating, and they don't fly around in the daytime normally. So if it's dark out, it's going to be a bat. If it's still light enough to see up into the sky, it's probably going to be a chimney swift. I mean, there might be a little bit of overlap, but basically they don't share the same niche. They don't share the same territory.
Okay. What about the theory that bird feeders are generating dependency of birds on artificial feeding?
I've heard that a lot, yeah, and I don't know. I mean, I'm not the expert on it. I have read a lot of bird, Audubon-related organizations that say that it doesn't. That even though the birds seem to be eating at your feeder a lot, that it really is only producing about 10% of what they are eating. And I don't know really whether that's true. That's why I say that you're really feeding the birds for yourself. You're not feeding them for the birds. The birds don't need to have, they don't need to be fed by you. So, unless you really want to see the birds close up, you don't need to feel compelled to feed birds. I'm of mixed emotions about that. I mean, I guess basically I'm very selfish. I just like to see the birds close up.
Michael wants to know, is black oil sunflower seeds the best choice for local feeders to attract the greatest variety of birds?
I used to just buy striped sunflower seeds, not the black oil ones, but I can't get the striped ones anymore for some reason to do with distribution, I guess. The striped ones have become much more rare, and the black oil ones are the ones, and the birds eat them. I mean, they certainly eat them, but it's only certain birds that like sunflower seeds. I mean, cardinals love them. The cardinals are not good at perching in feeders, and I use a feeder that has a screen around it to keep larger birds out so that just the smaller birds can get in. But the cardinals will just eat what's on the ground because the smaller birds are very messy, and they drop seeds all over the place. So the cardinals will mop up after them. But some of the smaller birds can't handle sunflower seeds. It takes a bit to crack the seeds open. But what they do attract chickadees, though, and titmice, because those birds will take the seed out of the feeder, carry it to a branch, and then they'll hold it down with their feet and peck it apart with their feet. So I think the reason why I would push sunflower seeds over the millet seeds and things, I mean, a lot of birds don't like the millet seed, and they'll just spread it all over the floor and just take out the sunflower seeds. So I think if you're going to do one or the other, I'd go with the sunflower seeds. And millet seed definitely attracts, you know, we call it cheap seed, attracts the cheap birds. It attracts English sparrows, unbelievably so. And I know English sparrows are a big problem in a lot of people's yards. We're a little bit further removed from the street, so we don't have so many. But if you're anywhere near a public building or a parking lot or something, you're probably going to have a lot of English sparrows coming to your feeders.
Thank you, Jean. Before we go, do you want to just mention the database where people can hear bird sounds?
Yeah, okay, I'll do that. And yeah, it's called The Birds of the World. I showed it last week. It is a database that's owned by Cary Library, subscribed to by Cary Library, so you can get into it for free. It's managed by the Cornell Ornithological Laboratory. And you know, all you do is enter the database, put in the common name of the bird that you're interested in, and then go down to the multimedia button, and you can hear all kinds of the bird sounds. And it's a very good teaching tool for learning the sounds of the birds that you're hearing outdoors. So thank you very much.
We have just a couple more questions if people can bear with us for a second. Well, actually, we have a few. Well, it says, no birds seem to eat my thistle seeds. Do you know why?
It may be, I don't know how long you've been hanging it, but it may be that it just hasn't been discovered yet. It may be that there aren't any of the little birds near you that can take advantage of the thistle seed. Thistle seed is very, very tiny. The feeders that feed it, it's either like a net bag with tiny little holes in it that the birds pull the seeds out of, or a plastic tube feeder that has tiny little holes in it. So only certain birds have beaks small enough to get into those. The thistle seed is really meant to feed goldfinches, house finches, chickadees. Those are the three main kinds of birds that will eat thistle seed. I don't think most English sparrows have a beak small enough to eat from those feeders. So you're probably going to be spared English sparrows. But I do remember that when I first started feeding thistle seed, it took me a couple of years before I started to see the goldfinches coming. Now, I don't know if they just weren't in our area, or if it just took them a long time to discover the feeder. Birds definitely learn from other birds what to eat and where to eat. So, you know, once you have a few coming, then you'll start to see more and more. So I would keep it out there longer if you just make sure the holes are open and birds can get at them.
Okay, one last question from Barry. How do you discourage squirrels? And it looks like we've had some responses from Paulette. Best squirrel baffle I've ever had was from Wild Birds Unlimited. And Michael says the squirrel buster plus feeder from Broom totally keeps squirrels away.
Yeah, I've used a number of things over the years. I find this, let me go back to my feeder, a picture, and I'll show you. Let's see if I can get, I'll have to swoop down through these. Okay, this baffle right here is absolutely foolproof. This is a double shepherd's crook feeder, so it has a hook on each side to hold. And this is a tube, it looks like a stovepipe. It's made out of metal. And the squirrels climb up the post here, and they get into this tube and it's closed off at the top. They can't get out. The tube is too big. They can't, the sides are slippery. They can't get a grip on it. It's wide enough in diameter that they can't get their arms around it. So it is absolutely squirrel proof. These things are pretty good, but you know, a really enterprising squirrel can get around them, can climb over them sometimes. The reason that I am satisfied with using these on the suet feeder is that the squirrels are not that interested in the suet. They don't even really try anymore to get to the suet. And the same with the thistle seed. You know, you can see here, this is just an open pipe. I didn't put anything on this, and they never go in there. It's mainly the sunflower seeds and this cheap seed that they like to go for. We have another sunflower seed feeder behind our house, and that one my husband has rigged up because it's in a treed area. It's very woodsy and there are lots of trees. The squirrels can just jump on it and land on it, and it's one of those feeders that has a baffle. When a heavy bird lands on the bar, it shuts off the seeds so that they can't eat it. So it's only for smaller birds. And that works fine, except that the squirrels have figured out how to hang by their back feet from the roof of this feeder. They don't have to touch the bar at all, and then they can just help themselves to the food. So what we have done, and I don't have a picture of it, it's really kind of amusing, but my husband found that he hung that feeder from a tree, from a limb, and then hung above it a large plastic trash can with a hole cut in the base of it, is hanging upside down. That makes a baffle over the feeder that the squirrels can't, so the squirrels can't get down the rope and get onto the feeder. But yeah, squirrels are always a problem.
And they're very clever, it sounds like.
Yes, they're very clever, but this arrangement has worked fine now for years. I mean, and we have lots of squirrels. They eat down below the feeder, but they can't get up into the feeders.
Well, thank you, Jean, so much. This is fascinating. Andrea says that's a raccoon baffle, so that makes me think that we have lots of experts here listening in. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you everybody for being here with us, and have a wonderful Saturday afternoon.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.